Marcus's hand was still on the security panel when Victoria Grant's voice cut through the empty hallway, demanding to know how a janitor possessed her company's executive access code. Quote, the truth would either expose the secret that had saved her daughter or destroy everything both of them had left to lose. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The beep of the security panel echoed through the empty hallway like an accusation. Marcus Chun froze, his hand still hovering near the keypad, the 9-digit code he had just entered glowing green on the small screen. He had 30 seconds before the system logged who had accessed the executive floor at 2 in the morning, and in those 30 seconds his entire world was about to collapse. How do you know our company's security code? The voice came from behind him, sharp and cold as winter steel. Marcus turned slowly, his cleaning cart bumping against his leg. Victoria Grant stood 15 feet away, her arms crossed, her designer suit somehow still crisp despite the late hour. Her dark eyes were fixed on him with the intensity of a prosecutor who had just caught a defendant in a lie. The CEO of Novatech Industries did not look confused. She looked furious. Marcus's mouth went dry. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. I don't know what you mean, he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. His mind raced through a dozen explanations, all of them inadequate, all of them true. Victoria took 3 measured steps toward him. Each click of her heels on the marble floor was a countdown. Don't play games with me. That code changes every 72 hours. It's algorithmically generated and distributed only to C-suite executives and the head of security. She pointed at the glowing panel. So I'll ask you again, how does a night janitor know a code that only 6 people in this entire company possess? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Marcus couldn't begin to address. His heart hammered against his rib. He could see it in her eyes, the calculation happening in real time. She was already building a case, already imagining corporate espionage. Data theft, a security breach that would make headline. He wanted to tell her the truth, but the truth was so much more complicated than a simple answer. The truth would require him to go back 5 years, to a life he had carefully buried beneath layers of invisible routine. It had started innocently enough, or at least that's what Marcus told himself on the nights when sleep wouldn't come. 3 months ago, he had been cleaning the West Wing executive offices, the same mindless work he did every weeknight from 10 until 6 in the morning. Empty the trash, wipe down the desks, vacuum the floors, restock the break rooms. He had perfected the art of being invisible, moving through the corporate landscape like a ghost. People looked through him, not at him, and that was exactly how he preferred it. But that night, as he pushed his cart past Victoria Grant's corner office, he had heard something that made him stop. It was a sound he knew too well, a sound that bypassed all his carefully constructed defenses and struck directly at the core of who he had once been. A child crying, not the angry tantrum of a tired kid, but the quiet, hopeless sobbing of a little girl who had given up on being heard. Marcus had stood frozen in the hallway, his hand gripping the handle of his cart so tightly his knuckles went white. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to walk away, to do his job, to remain invisible. But that crying, it sounded so much like his own daughter Emma on the worst nights back when she was small and scared and the world felt too big and too cruel. He had approached the partially open door and looked inside. Victoria Grant sat at her massive desk, her back rigid, her fingers flying across her keyboard. The glow of multiple monitors cast harsh shadows across her face. And there on the small leather sofa against the wall sat a little girl of maybe 7 or 8 years old. She wore a wrinkled school uniform, her dark hair falling across her face as she hunched over a tablet, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The contrast was jarring. The powerful CEO focused entirely on her work, and the small child, alone and crying in the same room, invisible in her own way. Marcus had seen that scene 3 more times over the following. Always late at night, always the CEO working while her daughter sat alone, trying to be quiet, trying not to be a burden. He learned the girl's name was Sophie. He learned she spent almost every weeknight in that office because Victoria's ex-husband had custody on weekends only. He learned that Sophie had a reading disability that made homework a nightmare, that she was being bullied at her expensive private school, that she was struggling and scared and her mother was too consumed by quarterly reports and board meetings to see it. Marcus should have minded his own business. He should have kept pushing his cart, kept being invisible, but he couldn't, because 5 years ago, before his life had shattered into pieces he couldn't put back together. Marcus Chun had been Dr. Marcus Chun. He had been one of the most respected child psychologists in the city, with a thriving practice and a specialty in learning disabilities and childhood anxiety. He had helped hundreds of children find their way through the darkness. And then his wife died suddenly and without warning, leaving him with a 6-year-old daughter and a mountain of medical debt that swallowed everything he owned. The practice had been the first thing to go, sold to pay for the funeral and the hospital bills, then the house, the car, the savings account he had built for Emma's college fund. In 18 months, Dr. Marcus Chun had ceased to exist, replaced by Marcus the janitor, a man whose only goal was to keep a roof over his daughter's head and food on their table. He had chosen the night shift deliberately. It meant he could be home when Emma got on the school bus and be there when she got off. It meant he could help with homework and make dinner and tuck her in before heading to work. It meant he could be a father, even if he could no longer be anything else. So when he saw Sophie crying in her mother's office for the 4th time, he made a decision that he knew would complicate everything. He knocked softly on the doorframe. Victoria had looked up, annoyed at the interruption, and he had said the words that started it all. "Excuse me, Miss Grant, I noticed your daughter is working on her reading homework. Gets to be pretty good at that stuff. If you'd like, I could help her while you finish your work, just to give you both a break." Victoria had stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. He was just the janitor, the invisible man who emptied her trash. But she had seen something in his face. Or maybe she had just been desperate enough to accept help from any source. "Fine," she had said curtly. 20 minutes. Then I need to lock up." Those 20 minutes had changed everything. Now standing in the hallway at 2 in the morning with Victoria's accusation hanging in the air, Marcus understood that all of it, every choice he had made, had led to this moment. The moment when his carefully constructed invisibility was about to be stripped away, and the truth, complicated and impossible as it was, would have to come out. "I can explain," he said quietly, knowing that the explanation would sound insane. "But you're not going to believe me." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Try me." Her voice was clipped, controlled, but Marcus could hear the edge of something dangerous underneath. She had already pulled her phone from her pocket, her thumb hovering over the screen. One call to security and this conversation would be over. He would be escorted out in handcuffs, questioned by police, possibly charged with corporate espionage. And Emma, his sweet Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in their small apartment across town, would wake up to find her father gone. "The first time I helped Sophie with her reading homework," Marcus began, choosing his words carefully. "She was working on a chapter book about a girl who could talk to animals. She couldn't get through 3 sentences without breaking down. The words kept jumbling together in her mind. I recognized the pattern immediately. It wasn't that she couldn't read, it was that her brain was processing the information differently. She has a form of dyslexia combined with visual processing disorder." Victoria's thumb stopped moving. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Go on." "I taught her a technique," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength as he remembered that first night. "We used colored overlays on the page, broke the sentences into smaller chunks, and created visual anchors for difficult words. Within 15 minutes, she had read an entire page. She looked at me like I'd just performed magic." He paused, the memory bittersweet. "Your daughter is brilliant, Miss Grant. She just needed someone to show her a different path." That had been the beginning. What was supposed to be a one-time favor had turned into a routine. 3 nights a week, Marcus would arrive at Victoria's office during his shift, and for 30 minutes he would work with Sophie. He taught her memory techniques, helped her build confidence, showed her that the words on the page weren't her enemy, and slowly, painfully slowly, the crying stopped. Sophie began to smile when she saw him. She started finishing her homework before he even arrived, eager to show him her progress. Victoria never asked many questions. She would work at her desk, occasionally glancing over, but mostly letting them work in peace. Marcus suspected she was grateful, but too proud or too busy to acknowledge it directly. He didn't need acknowledgement. Watching Sophie transform from a defeated little girl into a confident reader was payment enough. It reminded him of why he had become a child psychologist in the first place, before the world had taken everything from him. But then, 6 weeks ago, something had shifted. Marcus arrived for his usual Thursday night session to find Victoria's office door locked and the lights off. He had felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. He looked forward to these sessions more than he cared to admit. They were a lifeline to his old self, a reminder that Dr. Marcus Chun still existed somewhere beneath the uniform and the mop bucket. He had moved on with his cleaning route, telling himself it was probably for the best. Getting attached was dangerous. Caring too much had consequences. The next week, the office was locked again, and the week after that, Marcus tried to convince himself that it didn't matter. Victoria had probably hired a proper tutor, someone with credentials and references, someone who wasn't a janitor working for minimum wage. It was the logical choice. It was the right choice. But every time he passed that dark office, he wondered if Sophie was okay, if she was still making progress, if she remembered the techniques he had taught her. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday, nearly 3 in the morning, and Marcus was finishing up the executive floor. He heard raised voices coming from the direction of the conference room, and as he drew closer, he recognized Victoria's voice, sharp with frustration. The conference room door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, Marcus could see her standing at the head of the long table, her phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what you have to do," she was saying, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Find another site. Run the numbers again. I need options by morning." She ended the call and immediately made another one. "This is Victoria Grant. I need an emergency analysis of the Portland acquisition." "Yes, tonight. I'll be here until it's done." Marcus started to move away, not wanting to intrude, but then he heard a small sound from inside the room. He looked more carefully and saw Sophie curled up on one of the leather chairs in the corner, her school backpack beside her, fast asleep. It was nearly 3 in the morning on a school night, and this child was in a corporate office instead of in her bed. Marcus felt a surge of anger mixed with deep concern. He knew Victoria was under pressure. The rumors had been flying through the building for weeks. Novatech was in the middle of a hostile takeover attempt, and the board was divided. But this, leaving a child asleep in an office chair while deals were being made, this crossed a line. He knocked gently on the doorframe. Victoria spun around, startled, her hand instinctively moving to her chest. "What are you doing here?" Her exhaustion was visible now, dark circles under her eyes, her usually perfect hair falling loose from its clip. "I'm sorry to disturb you," Marcus said quietly. "Just wanted to make sure Sophie was all right. She's been asleep for a while. Maybe I could move her to the couch in your office. It would be more comfortable." Victoria looked at her daughter as if seeing her for the first time that evening. Guilt and shame washed across her face, quickly masked by the return of her professional composure. "That's fine, thank you." Her voice was hollow, defeated in a way Marcus had never heard before. He carefully gathered Sophie into his arms. She stirred slightly but didn't wake, her head resting against his shoulder. He carried her down the hall to Victoria's office, Victoria following behind in silence. She laid Sophie gently on the leather couch, tucking her backpack under her head as a pillow and draping his own jacket over her as a blanket. Sophie mumbled something in her sleep, something that sounded like "Thank you, Mr. Marcus," and his heart clenched. When he turned around, Victoria was standing in the doorway, watching them. There were tears on her cheeks, silent and unacknowledged. "I'm a terrible mother," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I can't keep her safe. I can't give her what she needs. I'm failing at the one job that actually matters." Marcus should have stayed silent. He should have mumbled something polite and left. But the psychologist in him, dormant for so long, stirred to life. "You're not failing her. You're surviving. There's a difference." Victoria looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time since he had started working there. "Who are you? Not your name. I mean, who are you really?" And so he told her. Not everything, but enough. He told her about his practice, about his wife's death, about the financial collapse that had forced him to start over. He told her about Emma, about the guilt he carried for not being able to give his daughter the life he had planned. He told her things he hadn't spoken aloud in 5 years, and Victoria listened with the intensity of a woman desperate for absolution, for proof that she wasn't the only one drowning. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that surprised him. "I need your help, not with Sophie. With something bigger. The takeover, the board meeting, it's all coming to a head, and I'm terrified I'm going to lose everything I've built." That conversation had led to others. Late-night sessions where Victoria would talk through her strategies, and Marcus, drawing on skills he thought he'd lost, would help her see patterns, understand motivation, navigate the complex psychology of corporate warfare. He became her unofficial advisor, her secret weapon, and in return she had given him something he hadn't realized he needed. She had seen him, not as a janitor, but as the person he used to be. Now standing in the hallway with the security code glowing between them, Marcus met Victoria's gaze steadily. "You gave me the code 6 weeks ago. You said you trusted me. You said you needed someone who could access this floor if there was an emergency. Someone who wouldn't ask questions. You said I was the only person in this building you could count on. Do you remember that?" Victoria's face went pale. The pieces were clicking into place, and with them came a realization that looked like it physically hurt. Victoria's hand dropped to her side, the phone forgotten. "Oh God." The words came out as barely more than a breath. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I didn't recognize you. I saw someone at the security panel and I thought..." She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. The exhaustion that had been hidden beneath her executive armor was suddenly visible in every line of her face. "You thought it was corporate espionage," Marcus finished for her. "You thought someone was trying to access confidential files. You saw a threat, not me, I understand." He did understand. In the harsh, fluorescent lighting of the empty hallway, with only the hum of the building's ventilation system breaking the silence, Victoria Grant looked less like a CEO and more like a woman who was barely holding herself together. "What are you doing here at 2 in the morning?" she asked, her voice softer now, the edge of accusation replaced by genuine confusion. "The code was for emergencies. You said you understood that." Marcus hesitated. The truth felt too raw, too exposing. But they had gone too far past the boundaries of boss and employee, too far past the carefully maintained distance that had once defined their relationship, for him to lie now. "It's Emma's birthday tomorrow," he said quietly. "She turns 12, and I realized tonight that I don't have money for a cake or a present. I've been picking up extra shifts where I can, but last month she got sick and the urgent care visit wiped out my savings. So I came up here because you told me that if I ever needed help, there was a discretionary fund in the operations safe. You said I should never hesitate to ask." Victoria closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "The safe. Of course. I completely forgot. How much do you need?" "Enough for a birthday cake and maybe a book," Marcus said, feeling the familiar shame of asking for help burn in his chest. "Emma loves her. She wants the new novel in that series about the girl detective. It's $30. I'll pay you back for my next check." "Stop," Victoria said, the words sharp but not unkind. "Just stop. You've been helping me navigate the most critical period of my company's history for 6 weeks, and you're apologizing for needing $30 for your daughter's birthday?" She shook her head, disgust evident on her face, but Marcus realized it wasn't directed at him. It was directed at herself. "I didn't even know it was her birthday. I've been so consumed with the board meeting and the takeover that I haven't asked about your life in weeks." She walked past him toward her office, her heels clicking purposefully against the floor. Come with me. Not to the safe, to my office. We need to talk. Marcus followed, pushing his cleaning cart to the side of the hallway. Inside Victoria's expansive corner office, the city lights glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, constellation of proof that the world continued to turn even while theirs seemed to be shifting on its axis. Victoria moved to her desk and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a leather-bound checkbook that looked like it belonged in a different era. She began writing, the scratch of pen on paper loud in the quiet room. Marcus stood awkwardly near the door, his hands shoved in his pockets, feeling like an intruder despite her invitation. When she finished, she tore out the check and held it toward him. He took it automatically, then looked down at the amount. His breath caught in his throat. This is $10,000, he said, his voice strangling. Victoria, I can't. I asked for 30. This is insane. It's insulting, she corrected him. It should be 10 times that amount. Do you have any idea what you've done for me? For Sophie? For this company? She gestured at the papers scattered across her desk. Strategic plans and financial projections and hostile takeover defense strategies. Half of these ideas came from the board presentation that saved us last month. The one that convinced the institutional investors to hold their positions, that was built on psychological insights you gave. I was just talking, Marcus protested. You did all the real work. You always do this, Victoria said, and there was frustration in her voice now, an emotion that seemed directed both at him and at the situation they found themselves in. You diminish yourself, you hide. You act like you're just the janitor, just the help, just a man who empties trash cans, but you're not. You're Dr. Marcus Chun, and you've been a ghost for 5 years because the world broke you. Well, I'm done letting you hide. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't allowed himself to feel since his wife's funeral. I don't know how to be that person anymore. The confession came out raw and painful. That person had a life that made sense. That person had a future. I'm just trying to survive, Victoria. I'm just trying to make sure my daughter has food and shelter and maybe a birthday cake once a year. That's all I have left in me. That's not true, Victoria said, moving around the desk to stand in front of him. Sophie talks about you constantly. Did you know that? She calls you her reading teacher. She tells me about the games you play with words, the tricks you taught her to remember things. Last week she got an A on her English test, an A, Marcus, the first one she's ever received. She cried. She was so happy. And when I asked her what changed, she said, Mr. Marcus showed me that my brain isn't broken, it just works differently. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He remembered that night, the way Sophie had been so frustrated with herself, calling herself stupid, saying she wished her brain worked like everyone else's. He had knelt beside her and explained that different wasn't wrong, that some of the most brilliant people in history had learned differently, that her unique way of seeing the world was a gift, not a curse. He hadn't realized how deeply those words had landed. You gave my daughter something I couldn't give her, Victoria continued. Hope. And whether you want to admit it or not, you gave me something too. A friend. Someone who sees past the title and the bank account and the corporate armor. Someone who talks to me like I'm just a person, not a balance sheet. Do you have any idea how rare that is? The vulnerability in her voice was startling. Marcus had seen Victoria command boardrooms, face down hostile investors, negotiate multi-million-dollar deals without blinking. But here, in the quiet of her office at 2 a.m, she looked like someone who was drowning and had just been thrown a rope. I didn't mean to complicate your life, he said softly. I was just trying to help Sophie. That's where it started. But it became more than that, didn't it? Victoria asked. For both of us. Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't, because the truth was complicated and terrifying and felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. He was a janitor with a dead-end job and a mountain of debt. She was a CEO worth millions, fighting to save her company from a hostile takeover. There was no world in which their paths should have crossed, let alone intertwined the way they had. The check in his hand suddenly felt heavy, weighted with implications he wasn't ready to examine. I can't take this. It's too much. Yes, you can, Victoria said firmly. And you will, because tomorrow is your daughter's birthday, and she deserves more than a $30 book. She deserves a father who isn't working himself into the ground, who isn't sacrificing everything just to survive. Take it, Marcus, please. He looked at the check again, at the careful script of her handwriting, at the amount that represented more than 3 months of his salary. It was a gift, but it was also a symbol of the vast distance between their worlds, a distance that no amount of late-night conversations or shared vulnerabilities could fully bridge. But it was also something else. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition that what had developed between them over the past few months mattered, that it was real, that it couldn't be dismissed or categorized or filed away under professional courtesy. Thank you, he finally whispered, folding the check carefully and sliding it into his pocket. Emma will be thrilled. And Marcus, Victoria added, her hand briefly touching his arm, about the security code. I'm glad you have it. I meant what I said. You're the only person I trust completely. That trust, fragile and hard-won, hung in the air between them like a promise neither of them was quite ready to make. Emma's birthday party was a modest affair in their small apartment, but to Marcus it felt like a triumph. The cake from the local bakery was decorated with purple frosting and edible flowers, Emma's favorites. The stack of books he'd been able to buy sat wrapped on the kitchen table, along with a new art set she'd been eyeing for months. When Emma had come home from school and seen it all, her face had lit up with pure joy, and in that moment, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not the hollow professional pride of his old life, but the deep, bone-level satisfaction of having given his daughter a moment of happiness. She had invited 3 friends from school, and the sound of their laughter filled the apartment with a warmth that made the cramped space feel vast. Marcus watched from the kitchen doorway as Emma showed off her new books, her animated explanations about why each one was perfect, making his chest ache with love. This was what mattered. This was what he had been fighting for through every exhausting night shift, every moment of doubt, every time he questioned whether he had made the right choices. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Victoria. "I hope Emma had a wonderful birthday. Sophie wanted me to tell her happy birthday too. She made her a card but was too shy to give it to you in person. Can we drop it off tomorrow?" Marcus smiled at the screen, imagining Sophie carefully crafting a card with her newly confident reading skills. Of course, he typed back, "We'd love that. Emma would be thrilled." There was a pause, those 3 dots indicating Victoria was typing, then deleting, then typing again. Finally, another message came through. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything. You've changed our lives more than you know." He stared at those words for a long moment, feeling the weight of them settle somewhere in his chest. The thing was, she had changed his life too. For 5 years, he had been sleepwalking through existence, moving from one task to the next, never looking up, never allowing himself to want anything beyond survival. But working with Sophie, talking with Victoria in the quiet hours of the night, remembering who he used to be, it had awakened something in him. A dangerous, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, Dr. Marcus Chun wasn't gone forever. Maybe he was just dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The next evening, Victoria arrived at his apartment with Sophie. It was the first time she had seen where he lived, and Marcus felt a flash of embarrassment at the threadbare furniture, the peeling paint, the obvious signs of a life lived on the edge of financial collapse. But Victoria didn't seem to notice, or more likely, she simply didn't care. Sophie ran straight to Emma, thrusting a handmade card into her hands. "I made it myself," Sophie announced proudly. "I read the birthday message 3 times to make sure I spelled everything right." Emma opened the card, her face breaking into a delighted smile at the colorful drawing of 2 girls holding hands under a rainbow. "This is beautiful, Sophie. Thank you so much." The 2 girls immediately disappeared into Emma's small bedroom, their excited chatter drifting back to the adults. Victoria stood awkwardly in the living room, looking like she wanted to say something but didn't know how to begin. "Would you like some coffee?" Marcus offered, gesturing toward the kitchen. "It's not fancy, but it's hot." "That would be nice," Victoria said, following him. She leaned against the counter while he pulled out 2 mismatched mugs, the comfortable silence between them feeling different here, in his space, than it did in her office. "This is a good home," she said finally. "I can feel Emma's happiness here. You've built something real." Marcus poured the coffee, his hands steady despite the emotion rising in his throat. "I've tried. It's not what I wanted to give her. She should have had the house with the yard, the college fund, the security. Instead, she has this." He gestured vaguely at the small apartment. "But she's happy. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Victoria said softly. "I have a penthouse apartment, a vacation home, more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. And Sophie spends most of her time wishing she had what Emma has. A parent who's actually there, who sees her, who makes her feel like she matters more than any business deal." She took the offered mug, wrapping her hands around it. "You're a better parent than I am, Marcus." "That's not true," Marcus said immediately. "You're fighting to give Sophie a stable future. You're working yourself to exhaustion to protect what you've built. That's love, Victoria. It just looks different than mine." They stood in the small kitchen, the overhead light casting soft shadows, and Marcus felt the air between them shift. It was charged with something unspoken, something that had been building for weeks but neither of them had acknowledged. "The board meeting is in 3 days," Victoria said, breaking the moment. "The final vote on the takeover. I've done everything I can, used every strategy we talked about, but I'm still not sure I have the numbers. If I lose this, I lose the company. Everything my father built, everything I've spent 15 years protecting, it'll be gone." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Marcus saw the fear she worked so hard to hide. "You won't lose," he said with a certainty he didn't entirely feel. "You're brilliant, Victoria. You've outmaneuvered them at every turn, but even if the worst happens, even if you lose the company, you'll still have what matters. You'll still have Sophie. You'll still have your integrity. Those things can't be taken from you in a boardroom vote." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "How do you do that? Stay so calm, so centered when your whole world fell apart?" "I've seen your resume, Mark. Before everything changed, you were at the top of your field. You had everything, and you lost it all. How are you not angry? How are you not bitter?" Marcus set down his mug, considering the question. He had never really articulated it, even to himself. "I was angry. For a long time I was furious at the universe, at the unfairness of it all. Sarah was 34 years old. She did everything right. She ate well, exercised, never smoked. And she still got sick. She still died. I watched the woman I loved fade away and I couldn't stop it. No amount of money or expertise or desperate prayers made any difference." He paused, the memory still sharp even after 5 years. "But then one day Emma asked me if I was angry at Mommy for leaving us. She was 7 years old, and she thought my grief was anger at Sarah. And I realized that my bitterness was poisoning the one pure good thing I had left, so I made a choice. I let go of the anger, I let go of the life I thought I deserved, and I focused on the only thing that mattered, being the father Emma needed." Victoria set down her own mug and stepped closer. Her eyes were bright with tears. "You're remarkable. You know that, don't you? You've been through hell, And you came out the other side with your humanity intact. Most people, they let trauma make them hard. You let it make you softer. Marcus shook his head. I'm not remarkable. I'm just tired of fighting battles I can't win. But you, Victoria, you're still in the arena. You're still fighting. That takes a different kind of courage. She was close now. Close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. Close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something subtle and expensive that reminded him of night-blooming flowers. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, standing in his small kitchen while their daughters played in the next room. The boundaries they had maintained so carefully seemed gossamer thin, ready to dissolve with a single word or touch. Then Sophie's laughter rang out from Emma's room, bright and uninhibited, and the spell broke. Victoria stepped back, clearing her throat. We should go. It's getting late and Sophie has school tomorrow. She moved toward the living room, calling for her daughter, her professional mask sliding back into place. But as Marcus walked them to the door, Sophie clutching her coat and chattering about how much fun she'd had, Victoria turned back one more time. The board meeting is Thursday at 2 o'clock, she said quietly. If you wanted to be there in the building, I would feel better knowing you were close, just in case. Marcus understood what she wasn't saying. She needed an anchor, a reminder that there was life beyond the corporate battlefield. I'll be there, he promised. And Victoria, you're going to win. I know it. The morning of the board meeting arrived with the weight of a verdict. Marcus had barely slept, his mind churning through worst-case scenarios despite his confident words to Victoria. He dropped Emma at school with an extra-long hug, promising her they would do something special that weekend, though he had no idea what their lives might look like by then. If Victoria lost the company, if the takeover succeeded, everything would change. The new leadership would bring in their own people, restructure departments, cut costs. Jobs like his were always the first to go. He arrived at Novatech headquarters 3 hours before his shift was scheduled to begin. The building hummed with a tense energy he could feel the moment he walked through the lobby. Employees clustered in small groups, their voices low and urgent. Everyone knew today was the day. The future of the company hung in the balance, and with it, the livelihoods of 3,000 people. Marcus made his way to the custodial office in the basement, a windowless room that smelled of industrial cleaner and old coffee. His supervisor, a gruff man named Daniels who rarely spoke more than necessary, looked up from his clipboard. Sean, you're early, Daniels said, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. Something wrong? Just wanted to make sure everything was perfect today, Marcus replied, pulling on his work uniform. Big meeting upstairs. Want to make sure the building looks its best. Daniels grunted his approval. That's the attitude I like. You're a good worker, Chun. Don't think I don't notice. He hesitated, then added in a lower voice. Word is there might be layoffs if the takeover goes through. Custodial staff, maintenance, anyone the new owners think is redundant. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Start looking around, maybe. Marcus nodded. The knot in his stomach tightened. Thanks for the warning. I appreciate it. He spent the next 2 hours in a kind of meditative routine, cleaning floors that were already spotless, polishing brass fixtures until they gleamed. Physical work had always helped him think, the repetitive motions freeing his mind to wander. He thought about Victoria, somewhere in the building, preparing for the fight of her professional life. He thought about Sophie and Emma, innocent children whose futures depended on decisions being made in boardrooms they would never see. At 1 o'clock, an hour before the meeting, Marcus found himself on the executive floor. He told himself he was just doing his job, checking the conference room where the board would meet, making sure everything was in order. But the truth was he needed to see Victoria, needed to offer some final word of encouragement before she walked into that room. Her office door was open and he could see her standing at the window, her back to him, her shoulders rigid with tension. He knocked softly on the doorframe. She turned, and the relief that flooded her face was almost painful to witness. Marcus, you came. I wasn't sure you would. I promised, didn't I? He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. How are you holding up? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've rehearsed my presentation 40 times. I know every number, every projection, every argument, and I'm still terrified. The vote could go either way. Wallace Brightman and his faction have been working the other board members all week. They're promising higher returns, aggressive expansion, a complete restructuring of the company culture. And what are you promising? Marcus asked, moving closer. She turned back to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. The same thing I've always promised. Stability, sustainable growth, a company that values its people as much as its profits. My father built Novatech on the principle that a business should be a force for good, not just a vehicle for wealth extraction. But that philosophy is old-fashioned now. Quaint. The market wants blood in the water, rapid returns, and constant disruption. Marcus stood beside her, looking out at the city sprawling below. The market isn't a person, Victoria. It's a collection of people, each with their own fears and hopes and values. And you're not talking to the market today. You're talking to your board, people who have known you for years, who've seen what kind of leader you are. They're not going to forget that just because Wallace Brightman whispers promises of higher dividend. She turned to face him, and he saw the vulnerability there, raw and unguarded. What if I'm not enough? What if everything I've done, all the sacrifices, all the late nights, what if it's not enough to save what my father built? Then you'll have given it everything you had, Marcus said, and that will have to be enough. You can't control the outcome, Victoria. You can only control who you are in that room. Be honest, be passionate. Remind them why they believed in you in the first place. She held his gaze for a long moment, and something passed between, something that felt like a promise. like a turning point. Thank you, she whispered, for being here, for believing in me when I'm struggling to believe in myself. I don't know what I would have done without you these past few months. You would have been fine, Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. You're stronger than you think, but I'm glad I could help. Victoria reached out and took his hand, her fingers cool against his palm. When this is over, regardless of how it goes, we need to talk. Really talk. About what's been happening between us, about what it means. This, she gestured between them, whatever this is, it's not just friendship anymore, is it? Marcus felt his heart rate spike, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. No, he admitted quietly. It's not just friendship. I don't know what it is, but it's more than that. That she squeezed his hand gently, then released it. Good, because I've been going crazy trying to pretend I don't feel it. She glanced at the clock on her desk. I need to go. The board members will be gathering in the conference room. Wish me luck. You don't need luck, Marcus said. You have something much better. You have the truth on your side. She gave him one last smile, fragile but genuine, then walked out of her office toward the conference room. Marcus watched her go, then made his way to a small supply closet across the hall from the boardroom. It was a ridiculous place to wait, surrounded by cleaning supplies and spare office equipment, but it had a small vent that carried sound from the conference room. He could hear voices, indistinct but present, a reminder that Victoria was in there fighting. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. He heard the meeting come to order, heard the murmur of voices as presentations were made. Couldn't make out specific words, but he could hear the rhythm of it, the ebb and flow of argument and counter-argument. At one point he heard Victoria's voice rise, clear and passionate, and he found himself holding his breath, willing her words to land, to penetrate, to change mind. 2 hours passed. Then 3. Marcus's legs were cramping from sitting on the floor of the supply closet, but he didn't move. He was there for Victoria, even if she didn't know it, a silent witness to the most important day of her professional life. Finally, he heard the scraping of chairs, the sound of people standing. The meeting was over. He waited, his heart pounding, straining to hear anything that might indicate the outcome. Then Victoria's office door opened and closed. He counted to 30, then slipped out of the supply closet and walked to her office. The door was closed, and he hesitated before knocking. There was no response. He tried the handle, found it unlocked, and pushed the door open carefully. Victoria was sitting at her desk, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. For a terrible moment, Marcus thought she was crying, thought the vote had gone against her. Then she looked up, and he saw her face was wet with tears, but she was smiling. We won, she said, her voice breaking. We actually won. The vote was 7-5. 7 board members stood with me. Wallace and his faction, they lost. The company is safe. Marcus felt relief crash over him like a wave. Oh, thank God, Victoria, that's incredible. He moved toward her desk, wanting to offer comfort, to share in her joy. She stood up, and suddenly she was in his arms, holding on to him like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. I couldn't have done it without you, she said against his shoulder. All those late-night conversations, the strategies we developed, the psychological insights you gave me about each board member. You helped me see what mattered, how to reach them. This victory is as much yours as it is mine. Marcus held her, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his chest, breathing in the scent of her perfume mixed with the salt of her tears. In that moment, surrounded by the trappings of her success, the expensive office and the city view, none of it mattered. What mattered was this: 2 people who had found each other in the midst of their separate struggle, who had become something neither of them expected. They stood like that for a long moment, the embrace lasting just slightly longer than congratulations required, crossing that invisible line from professional comfort into something more intimate. When Victoria finally pulled back, her eyes were still bright with tears, but there was something else there now. A question, an invitation, a threshold they were both standing on, but neither quite daring to cross. We should celebrate, she said, her voice soft. You, me, Sophie, and Emma. Somewhere nice. Let me take you all to dinner. A proper dinner, not pizza on the floor. Marcus smiled, but there was hesitation in it. Victoria, I appreciate the offer, but I can't afford the kind of places you go to, and I won't let you pay for everything. It's not right. She looked almost offended. You just helped me save my company. Least I can do is buy a dinner. Please, Marcus. Let me do this. Not as your boss, but as your friend. Friend. The word hung between them. Inadequate, but safer than the alternatives. All right, he said finally. But somewhere Emma will feel comfortable. Not one of those places where the silverware is confusing and the portions are tiny. Victoria laughed, the sound genuine and light. Deal. How about that Italian place on 5th Street? The one with the checkered tablecloths and the breadsticks? Emma mentioned it once, said it was her favorite. The fact that Victoria remembered that small detail, something Emma had probably mentioned in passing months ago, made Marcus's chest tight with an emotion he wasn't ready to name. That night, the 4 of them sat in a red vinyl booth at Antonio's Italian restaurant, a family-owned place that had been serving the neighborhood for 3 generations. Emma and Sophie sat on one side, giggling over a plate of mozzarella sticks, while Marcus and Victoria sat across. The atmosphere was warm, casual, filled with the sounds of families enjoying meals together. It was a world away from the corporate battlefield Victoria had conquered just hours earlier. Sophie looked happier than Marcus had ever seen her. She was telling Emma an elaborate story about a book she'd just finished, her words flowing easily. naturally, her confidence visible in every animated gesture. It was hard to believe this was the same little girl who had been crying silently in her mother's office just months ago. Emma listened with rapt attention, occasionally interjecting with questions or observations, the two of them forming a bond that seemed to transcend their different worlds. "They're good together," Victoria said quietly, watching the girls. "Sophie doesn't have many friends. Her learning difficulties made school hard, and kids can be cruel. But Emma never treats her like she's different. She just treats her like she's Sophie. That's Emma's gift," Marcus said, his voice warm with paternal pride. "She sees people for who they are, not what they can or can't do. She got that from her mother." Sarah had this way of making everyone feel valued, seen. Emma inherited that. Victoria reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "Sarah must have been an extraordinary woman." "She was," Marcus said simply. The waiter arrived with their entrees, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. They talked about movies they wanted to see, books they had read, small everyday things that had nothing to do with boardrooms or security codes or the weight of responsibility. For those 2 hours, they were just two parents enjoying dinner with their children, and the ordinariness of it felt like a gift. As they were leaving the restaurant, Emma tugging on Marcus's hand and asking if they could get gelato from the shop next door, Victoria's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her expression darkened. "I need to take this, I'm sorry. Give me just a moment." She stepped away and Marcus watched her posture change, saw the CEO slip back into place like armor. When she returned, the lightness had drained from her face. "That was Wallace Brightman," she said, her voice tight. "He requested a private meeting tomorrow morning. Said there are some concerns about the company's security protocols that need to be addressed immediately." Marcus felt a cold tendril of unease curl in his stomach. Security protocols? What kind of concerns? I don't know. He was vague, which means he's planning something. She looked at Marcus and he saw worry in her eyes. "Wallace doesn't accept defeat gracefully. He lost the vote today, but that doesn't mean he's given up. He'll be looking for any weakness, any angle to undermine my authority." The celebration dinner suddenly felt like a distant memory. They walked to Victoria's car in silence, the girls chattering obliviously ahead of them. When they reached the parking garage, Victoria turned to Marcus. "I'm probably being paranoid. It's been a long day and I'm seeing threats everywhere. But if Wallace is digging into security, if he's looking for something to use against me, I need to be prepared. Do you think there's any chance he could find out about the access code? About you having it?" Marcus felt his mouth go dry. "Why would that matter? You gave it to me for legitimate reasons. It's not like I'm using it to steal company secrets." "I know that," Victoria said, "but would Wallace see it that way? Would the other board members?" "You're not an executive, you're not even in management. If Wallace frames it as a security breach, as me giving sensitive access to unauthorized personnel, he could use it to question my judgment. The fact that we've become close, that our daughters are friends, he could twist that into something inappropriate." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus felt anger flare in his chest, hot and defensive. "There's nothing inappropriate about our friendship. We haven't done anything wrong. I know that. You know that. But perception matters in my world, Marcus. And Wallace is a master at manipulating perception." She ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident in every line of her body. "Maybe I should change the code, revoke your access. Not because I don't trust you, but because I don't want to give Wallace any ammunition." Marcus felt an unexpected sting at her words, even though he understood the logic. "Of course, that makes sense. You need to protect yourself and the company. Do what you need to do." He tried to keep his voice neutral, but Victoria heard the hurt underneath. "No," she said quickly. "I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let Wallace dictate who I trust or how I run my company. You have that code because I trust you more than anyone else in that building, because you've proven yourself to be honest and loyal and genuinely good. Those are rare qualities, Marcus, and I'm not throwing them away because some bitter man wants to play political games." Her fierce defense of him was both gratifying and terrifying. Marcus could see the danger she was walking into. The way her feelings for him, whatever they were clouding her professional judgment. "Victoria, maybe we need to take a step back. Put some distance between us, at least public, until things settle down with the board." Her eyes flashed with something that looked like pain. "Is that what you want? Distance?" "No," he admitted quietly, "but I don't want to be the reason you lose what you've fought so hard to protect. If my presence in your life is putting the company at risk, if it's giving your enemies ammunition, then maybe it's better if I step back." Victoria moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And what about Sophie? She's thriving because of you. What happens to her if you disappear? What happens to me?" She stopped as if she'd said too much, revealed too much. Marcus felt the world narrow to just the two of them, standing in the dim parking garage while their daughters played in the background. "This thing between us, whatever it is, it's getting complicated, maybe too complicated." "Maybe," Victoria agreed, "but I'm not ready to walk away from it. Are you?" The question was a challenge and a plea. Marcus thought about the past few months, about how Victoria and Sophie had become woven into the fabric of his and Emma's lives. He thought about the late-night conversation, the shared vulnerabilities, the way Victoria looked at him like he was more than just a janitor with a dead-end job. He thought about the feeling of coming alive again after 5 years of merely existing. "No," he said finally, "I'm not ready to walk away either." "Then we face whatever comes together," Victoria said. "If Wallace wants a fight, he'll get one, but I won't sacrifice what matters to win it. And you matter, Marcus. You and Emma, you both matter more than you know." The intensity of her declaration left Marcus breathless. He wanted to say something equally honest, equally vulnerable, but Emma and Sophie came running up at that moment, breathless and laughing, breaking the spell. "Can we do this again next week?" Sophie asked hopefully. "Please, Mom." Victoria smiled, but there was a tightness around her eyes. "We'll see, sweetheart. I have a very busy week ahead, but I promise we'll find time soon." The meeting with Wallace Brightman was scheduled for 9 o'clock the following morning. Victoria arrived at her office at 6:30. Unable to sleep, her mind racing through possible scenarios and counter-strategy. She had built her career on being prepared, on anticipating every angle, but Wallace was unpredictable in his ruthlessness. He had lost the board vote, but men like him didn't accept defeat. They regrouped, found new weapons, and attacked from unexpected direction. Marcus had texted her at 5 in the morning, a simple message that said, "You've got this. Remember, you're fighting for what's right. That matters more than any strategy." She had stared at those words for a long time, drawing strength from them in a way she couldn't quite explain. How had this man, someone who had entered her life by accident, become so essential to her sense of balance? How had his quiet faith in her become the anchor she relied on? At 8:45, her assistant buzzed to inform her that Wallace Brightman had arrived early and was waiting in the conference room. Of course he was. Power moves were Wallace's specialty. Arriving early to claim the psychological advantage, choosing the seat that would put him in control of the room's dynamics. Victoria took a moment to center herself, smoothing her suit jacket, checking her reflection in the window. She looked calm, composed, every inch the CEO. No one watching her would guess that her stomach was churning with anxiety. Wallace was sitting at the head of the conference table when she entered, a deliberate insult since this was her company, her building. He was a man in his late 50s with silver hair and the kind of expensive tan that came from frequent vacations to private islands. Smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Victoria, thank you for making time to see me. I know you must be exhausted after yesterday's rather dramatic board meeting." She took a seat across from him, not at the table's head where he clearly expected her to fight for position, but in a neutral chair that signaled she wasn't playing his games. "What concerns about security protocols did you want to discuss, Wallace? Let's get to the point." His smile widened and she saw the predator beneath the polished exterior. "Always so direct. That's what I've always admired about you. No patience for social niceties." "Very well, let's discuss your rather unusual relationship with one of the custodial staff." Victoria felt ice water flood her veins, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Oh, come now," Wallace said, pulling a folder from his briefcase and sliding it across the table. "Don't insult my intelligence. You've been meeting regularly with a janitor named Marcus Chun. Late-night conversations in your office, security footage shows him entering and leaving your personal workspace at unusual hours. And most interestingly, he has access to security codes that should be strictly limited to executive personnel." Victoria opened the folder, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Inside were printed screenshots from security cameras, time-stamped images of Marcus entering her office, standing in hallways outside operating hours, accessing restricted floors. Taken out of context, stripped of their innocent explanations, the images looked damning. Wallace had done his homework. "He's been helping my daughter with her reading difficulties," Victoria said calmly. "He's a former child psychologist. I gave him limited access so he could work with Sophie during my late hours at the office. It's completely above board." "A child psychologist working as a janitor," Wallace mused, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "How tragic. And you, of course, did all the appropriate background checks before allowing this man unsupervised access to your child in your office. You verified his credentials, his references, his reasons for such a dramatic career change." Victoria felt the trap closing around her. She hadn't done any of those things. She had trusted Marcus based on instinct, on the evidence of her own eyes watching him work with Sophie. In the corporate world, that was called negligence. "Marcus Chun is a good man who has been nothing but helpful to my family," she said, her voice firm. "There's nothing inappropriate about our arrangement." Wallace leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "I'm sure you believe that, but let me paint a picture for you. A janitor with mysterious credentials gains the trust of a wealthy, powerful CEO. He gets access to her office, her computer systems, her private security codes. He ingratiates himself with her daughter, making himself indispensable to her family. And all the while, he has unfettered access to confidential company information during hours when no one else is around." "That's not what happened," Victoria said, but she could hear how weak it sounded. Wallace was a master at reframing narratives, at turning innocent facts into sinister patterns. "What proof do you have," Wallace continued, "that this man is who he claims to be? What proof do you have that he hasn't been accessing proprietary information, selling corporate secrets, or worse? And even if he's completely innocent, which I doubt, what will the other board members think when they learn about this stunning lapse in judgment?" The threat was clear. Wallace couldn't beat her in a direct vote, so he was going to undermine her credibility, make her look reckless and emotionally compromised. And the worst part was he had chosen the perfect weapon. Her relationship with Marcus, examined under the harsh light of corporate scrutiny, did look questionable. She had given security access to an employee she barely knew, had spent hours alone with him, had let him into her personal life in ways that blurred every professional boundaries. "If you're threatening to take this to the board," Victoria said carefully, "then do it. I stand by my decisions." Wallace's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "I'm not threatening to take it to the board. I'm threatening to take it to the media. CEO of major tech firm grants security access to janitor with questionable past. Can you imagine the headlines? The speculation about what's really going on between you two? The damage to the company's reputation? To your personal reputation? Victoria felt cold fury replace her anxiety. This is blackmail. Call it what you want, Wallace said with a shrug. I call it protecting the company from a leader who has demonstrated dangerously poor judgment. But I'm not unreasonable, Victoria. I'm willing to keep this quiet under certain conditions. Here we go, Victoria thought. The real agenda. The reason Wallace had orchestrated this entire confrontation. What conditions? Step down as CEO, Wallace said, as casually as if he were discussing the weather. Announce it as a personal decision. Cite the need to spend more time with your daughter. The board will appoint me as interim CEO and will begin the process of restructuring the company properly. You'll retain your shares, your position on the board, your wealth. You'll just no longer have the power to stand in the way of progress. And in return, I'll ensure that none of this unpleasantness about your janitor becomes public knowledge. Victoria stared at him, speechless with rage. He had lost the takeover vote, so now he was attempting a coup through intimidation and character assassination. It was brilliant in its ruthlessness and utterly despicable. You have until 5 o'clock today to make your decision, Wallace said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. After that, I make some calls to journalist friends of mine. Think carefully about what's more important to you, Victoria. Your pride or your reputation? He left the conference room and Victoria sat alone in the silence, her mind racing. Every option before her was terrible. If she stepped down, Wallace would dismantle everything her father had built, turning Novatech into exactly the kind of soulless profit machine she had spent years fighting against. But if she refused, the scandal would hurt not just her, but Marcus. His past would be dredged up, examined, twisted. The peace he had found, the quiet life he had built for Emma, it would all be destroyed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. How did the meeting go? She stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How did she tell him that their friendship, their connection, had become a weapon being used against both of them? How did she tell him that she had to choose between him and everything she had spent her life building? She didn't respond. Instead, she sat in the empty conference room and tried to figure out a way to win a game where every move led to loss. Across the building in the custodial office, Marcus felt the unease that had been gnawing at him since last night crystallized into something darker. Victoria hadn't responded to his text, which wasn't like her. She always responded, even if just with a quick acknowledgement. He pulled out his phone and tried calling. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. Something was wrong. He could feel it the way he used to feel when a therapy session was about to take a difficult turn. That sixth sense that years of reading people had given him. He made a decision. He was going to find Victoria. Going to make sure she was all right. He left the custodial office and took the elevator to the executive floor, his heart pounding with an anxiety he couldn't name. When he reached her office, the door was closed. He knocked softly. No answer. He tried the handle. Locked. Marcus stood in the hallway, torn between concern and the knowledge that showing up uninvited on the executive floor would only make whatever situation Victoria was dealing with worse. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Marcus turned to find Wallace Brightman standing in the hallway, his expression one of amused contempt. Well, well, speak of the devil. The famous Marcus Chun, or should I say the infamous Marcus Chun? Wallace walked closer, circling Marcus like a shark that had caught the scent of blood. Tell me something, Mr. Chun. What exactly are your intentions toward our CEO? It's a simple question, really. Are you running a long con, or is this just opportunistic exploitation? Marcus felt his jaw tighten. I don't know who you are or what you think, but you're way off base. Oh, I know exactly who you are, Wallace said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through something. Dr. Marcus Chun, formerly of the Chicago Center for Child Development. Quite the impressive resume. Published papers, speaking engagements, a thriving private practice. Then your wife dies, and within 18 months, you've lost everything. Practice sold, house foreclosed, personal bankruptcy. That's quite a fall from grace. The casual cruelty with which Wallace recited the worst period of Marcus's life made his hands curl into fists. Your point. My point, Wallace said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr, is that desperate men do desperate things, and you, Mr. Chun, are a very desperate man. You've wormed your way into Victoria Grant's life, into her daughter's life, gaining access to private offices, security codes, confidential information. That's either the behavior of a con artist or a fool, and I don't think you're a fool. Marcus took a step forward, anger overriding his usual restraint. I've helped Sophie with her reading. That's it. I haven't touched any confidential information. I haven't done anything wrong. Then you won't mind if I have our security team do a full audit of every file you've accessed, every door you've opened, every minute you've spent on this floor. Wallace's smile was predatory, because I think what we'll find is a pattern of inappropriate access, of boundaries crossed, of a man who saw an opportunity and took it. Before Marcus could respond, Victoria's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Wallace, what are you doing? She'd emerged from the conference room, her face pale but her eyes blazing with fury. Marcus felt relief flood through him at the sight of her, followed immediately by concern. She looked exhausted, wrung out, like she had been through a battle and barely survived. Was just getting to know your protege, Wallace said smoothly. Fascinating man. Such an interesting background. Victoria's gaze shifted to Marcus, and he saw something in her eyes that made his stomach drop. It was fear, mixed with a desperate apology. "Marcus, you should go back to work. We'll talk later." The dismissal stung, even though he understood it. She was trying to protect him, trying to keep him out of whatever corporate warfare was happening. But walking away felt like abandonment, like leaving her alone on a battlefield with an enemy who had already drawn blood. "I think I should stay," he said quietly. "If this concerns me, I have a right to be part of the conversation." "How noble," Wallace said with mock admiration. "The janitor wants to play with the big boys, but this is above your pay grade, Chun, way above. This is about corporate governance, about fiduciary responsibility, about the kinds of decisions that affect thousands of jobs in dollars. Your little reading sessions with the boss's daughter? Those are just collateral damage." "Stop," Victoria said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This conversation is over, Wallace. You've made your position clear. Now leave." "Oh, I'll leave," Wallace said, already moving toward the elevator. "But the clock is still ticking, Victoria. 5 o'clock, make your choice." He disappeared into the elevator, and suddenly the hallway felt too quiet, too empty. Marcus turned to Victoria, searching her face for answers. What did he mean by that? What choice? Victoria closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, they were wet with unshed tears. "Come into my office. Need to talk." Inside her office, with the door closed and the city stretching out below them, Victoria told him everything. She explained Wallace's accusations, the security footage, the narrative he was building about inappropriate relationships and compromised judgment. She told him about the ultimatum, the choice between stepping down as CEO or having their relationship dragged through the media in the most sensational way possible. Marcus listened with growing horror, not for himself, but for what this meant for Victoria. "This is my fault. I never should have accepted your help with Sophie. I never should have let you give me that security code. I've put you in an impossible position." "No," Victoria said fiercely. "You didn't put me in this position. Wallace did. He's been looking for a way to undermine me since he lost the board vote, and he found the most personal, most painful angle he could. This isn't about security protocols or corporate governance. This is about power and his inability to accept that he doesn't have it. But the facts are the facts," Marcus said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I am a janitor with access to executive areas. I am someone you barely knew before giving me security codes. Looked at from the outside, your decisions do appear questionable. Is that what you think?" Victoria asked, her voice rising with emotion. "That I made a mistake trusting you? That our friendship, everything we've built these past months, was poor judgment?" Marcus shook his head. "That's not what I think, but it's what Wallace will make everyone else think. Victoria, you've fought so hard for this company. You've just won against a hostile takeover. You can't let him destroy that victory because of me. So what are you suggesting?" she asked, though the pain in her eyes said she already knew. "I'm suggesting I disappear. I quit my job here, move to a different part of the city. Wallace loses his ammunition, and you get to keep leading the company the way it should be led. We cut all ties, make it clear there was nothing inappropriate, and everyone moves on." The silence that followed was suffocating. Victoria walked to the window, her back to him, her shoulders rigid. "And Sophie? What about Sophie? She's made so much progress. If you just vanish from her life, it'll confirm all her worst fears about abandonment. It'll tell her that people leave, that connections are temporary, that she can't trust anyone to stay." Marcus felt the words hit him like physical blows because they were true. He had seen this pattern in his practice countless times. Children traumatized not by the initial loss, by the subsequent abandonments that confirmed their belief that they were unlovable, unworthy of commitment. "Then what's the alternative?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You step down as CEO? You let Wallace win? You give up everything you've fought for?" Victoria turned back to face him, and the raw emotion on her face took his breath away. "Maybe some things are worth giving up a CEO title for. Maybe I've had my priorities wrong all along. Watching Sophie thrive, having actual conversations with my daughter instead of working beside her in silence, remembering what it feels like to connect with someone who sees me as a person, not a position. Maybe those things matter more than a corporate title." Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides, standing close enough to see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. "Don't do that. Don't sacrifice your life's work because of me. This company needs you, Victoria. Your father built it on principles that matter, and you're the only one who can protect that legacy. Wallace will turn Novatech into just another soulless profit machine. You know he will. So let him have it," Victoria said, and there was a defiant edge to her voice now, mixed with something that sounded like liberation. "Let him have the title and the corner office and the board meet. I'll still have my shares. I'll still have influence, but I'll also have my daughter. I'll have time. I'll have a life that's about more than quarterly earnings and hostile takeovers." "This isn't you talking," Marcus said desperately. "This is exhaustion and fear and Wallace's manipulation. You're not thinking clearly. Or maybe I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years," Victoria countered. "Do you know what I realized sitting in that conference room after Wallace left? I realized that if I died tomorrow, my eulogy would be about business accomplishments. She grew market share. She increased shareholder value. She won against a hostile takeover. Not she was a good mother. She was a loyal friend. She was loved. That's not the legacy I want, Marcus." He reached out and took her hands, his grip gentle but firm. "Then don't make this decision today. Don't let Wallace's arbitrary deadline force you into a choice you might regret. Give me 48 hours. Let me think about this. See if there's another way. You're not the only one with a brain here, Victoria. Let me use mine." She looked at him, searching his face. "What could possibly change in 48 hours? "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted, "but I know that surrendering to blackmail is never the right answer. There's always another move, Another strategy. We just have to find it. The phone on Victoria's desk rang, shrill and insistent. She ignored it, her attention focused entirely on Marcus. You really think we can beat him at his own game? I think you've already beaten him once, Marcus said, and I think he's terrified of that. Terrified people make mistakes. We just need to wait for him to make his. Marcus left Victoria's office with a promise to call her by the end of the day and a nod of determination in his chest. He had 48 hours to find a solution, but no clear idea what that solution might look like. As he pushed his cleaning cart through the hallways, his mind worked through the problem from every angle. Wallace's leverage came from perception, from the ability to frame innocent actions as sinister. But perception could be changed. Narratives could be rewritten. He just needed to find the right angle. That afternoon, while cleaning the legal department on the 32nd floor, Marcus overheard a conversation that stopped him in his tracks. Two young associates were talking in low voices near the break room, apparently unaware he was in earshot. "Did you hear about the Wallace situation?" One of them said. "My boss is freaking out." "What Wallace situation?" The other responded. "Apparently there's an internal audit happening. Something about expense reports from his last 3 business trips. Numbers that don't add up. The compliance department is going through everything with a microscope." Marcus's mind started racing. An expense audit. That was interesting timing, right after Wallace had lost the board vote and started his campaign against Victoria. He filed the information away and continued his work. But now he was paying closer attention, listening more carefully to the conversations happening around him. One of the things people forgot about janitors was that they were invisible. People talked freely around them, as if the person emptying their trash couldn't hear or didn't matter. Over the years, Marcus had learned more about the inner workings of Novatech than most executives knew. By evening, he had collected several more pieces of information. Wallace had been making calls to board members all week, private meetings that weren't on any official calendar. The head of IT security had been asking questions about access logs from 6 months ago. Specifically, logs related to the acquisition. Wallace had pushed for that. The board ultimately rejected. And most interestingly, Wallace's executive assistant had called in sick for 3 days straight, which was apparently unprecedented. People who knew her said she seemed stressed, frightened even, in the days leading up to her absence. Marcus sat in the custodial office during his break, putting the pieces together like he used to assemble patient histories when he was a practicing psychologist. Individual symptoms didn't always tell the story, but patterns did. And the pattern here suggested that Wallace was worried about something. Worried enough to go on the offensive against Victoria rather than waiting for whatever investigation was happening to conclude. That desperation was the weakness Marcus had been looking for. He pulled out his phone and made a call to someone he hadn't spoke 5 years. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Marcus Chun, I wondered if I'd ever hear from you again." David Park had been his closest friend during his years running the psychology practice, a forensic accountant who specialized in financial investigations. They had collaborated on several cases involving insurance fraud and had maintained a close friendship until Marcus's life had fallen apart. "David, I need a favor," Marcus said without preamble. "A big one." After 5 years of radio silence, David's tone was wry but not unkind. "This should be interesting. Tell me what you need. I need you to look into someone for me. Deep dive into their financial history, business dealings, anything that might not hold up under scrutiny. It's for a friend who's being blackmailed by a corporate predator." There was a pause on the other end of the line. This friend wouldn't happen to be Victoria Grant, CEO of Novatech, would it? "Because I've been following that situation with some professional interest." Marcus felt hope flare in his chest. "You know about Wallace Brightman?" "Know about him?" David laughed. "Marcus, the man is a legend in forensic accounting circles, and not in a good way. He's been investigated 3 times for suspicious financial dealings, but he's always managed to slide out from under it. Smart, connected, and absolutely ruthless. If he's targeting your friend, she's in real danger. That's why I need your help," Marcus said. "I need something concrete, something that can counter his narrative." "Can you do that in 48 hours? Another pause, longer this time. "For anyone else, I'd say no. But you once helped my daughter through the worst period of her life when she was having panic attacks so severe she couldn't go to school. I owe you, Marcus. Send me everything you know about Wallace and I'll see what I can find." Marcus spent the next hour documenting everything he had overheard, every piece of the puzzle he had collected. He sent it all to David, then sat back and tried not to hope too hard. This was a long shot, a desperate play, but it was better than watching Victoria sacrifice everything she had built. His phone rang at 10 that night. It was David, and the excitement in his voice was palpable. "Marcus, beautiful bastard, you gave me exactly what I needed. That expense report audit you mentioned, it's the tip of a very corrupt iceberg. Wallace has been running a side operation for the last 2 years, using Novatech's resources and connections to broker deals for his own private investment fund. He's been funneling company opportunities to himself, taking kickbacks from vendors and cooking the books to hide it all." "How did you find this so fast?" Marcus asked, his heart pounding. "Because someone already did the hard work," David replied. "Wallace's executive assistant, Jennifer Morrison, she's been documenting everything for months, building a case. She went to the compliance department last week and turned over a file that's going to bury him. The audit you heard about, that's just the beginning. By the end of the month, Wallace is going to be facing criminal charges. not just corporate sanctions. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place with stunning clarity. That's why he's desperate. He knows the walls are closing in, so he's trying to take Victoria down with him. If he can force her out and get himself installed as CEO, he might be able to bury the investigation. Exactly, David. But here's the thing, Marcus. Wallace doesn't know that, He thinks he's got Victoria cornered, that she'll fold rather than face a scandal. If you can get this information to her, if she can call his bluff, he's finished. After hanging up with David, Marcus immediately called Victoria. She answered on the first ring. Marcus, I've been waiting all day to hear from you. I was starting to worry. Don't worry, he said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. I found something. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Somewhere private before you go into the office. There was a pause. Then Victoria's voice came back, cautious but hopeful. It's the coffee shop on 7th Street. 6 o'clock, I'll be there. Marcus barely slept that night, his mind running through how the confrontation with Wallace would play out. By 5:30 the next morning, he was dressed in his best clothes. Not the janitor uniform, but the gray slacks and button-down shirt he kept for parent-teacher conferences. He needed to look like Dr. Marcus Chun today, not Marcus the janitor. He needed Victoria to see him as an equal, as someone capable of standing beside her in the fight to come. Victoria was already at the coffee shop when he arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee in front of her. She looked like she hadn't slept either, dark circles under her eyes, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. When she saw him, relief flooded her face. You look different, she said as he slid into the booth across from her. Determined, she added. Like you've found something. I have, Marcus said, and proceeded to tell her everything. David's findings, Jennifer Morrison's documentation, the criminal investigation that was building against Wallace. Victoria's expression shifted from disbelief to amazement to fierce satisfaction as the pieces came together. He's been embezzling from the company, using his position on the board to enrich himself, and he had the audacity to question my judgment. Her laugh was sharp and bitter. The irony is almost beautiful. Here's what I think we should do, Marcus said, leaning forward. Wallace gave you until 5 o'clock today to make your decision. Don't respond. Don't call him. Don't acknowledge his ultimatum. Let him sweat. Let him wonder if you're going to fold. Then, tomorrow morning, you call an emergency board. You present the evidence of his financial misconduct and you let the board handle him. He loses everything, his position, his reputation, and possibly his freedom. Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but this time they were tears of relief. You did this. In less than 24 hours, you found a way to save everything. How? By listening, Marcus said simply. People talk around janitors like word furniture. I just paid attention to what they were saying. And I called in a favor from an old friend. But Victoria, this doesn't solve the other problem. Wallace might still try to take us both down on his way out. He might still leak his story about inappropriate access and questionable judgment. Then let him, Victoria said, her voice strong and certain. Let him try to smear my reputation while he's being led away in handcuffs for embezzlement. Let him try to make me look bad for trusting a good man who's helped my daughter more than any expensive therapist ever did. I'm done being afraid of him, Marcus. I'm done letting powerful men dictate how I live my life. She reached across the table and took his hand. Besides, I think it's time we stopped hiding whatever this is between us. Don't you? Marcus felt the weight of Victoria's question settle over him like a cloak. Whatever this is between us. They had danced around those words for months, maintaining careful distance even as they grew closer, pretending that their connection was simply friendship born of circumstance. But sitting in that coffee shop, with the morning light streaming through the windows and the sound of the city waking up around them, the pretense felt impossible to maintain. I think it's time we stopped hiding, he agreed quietly, his hand tightening around hers. But first, let's deal with Wallace. Then we can figure out what comes next. The emergency board meeting was called for 9 o'clock the following morning. Victoria had sent the notification through official channels, citing urgent matters requiring immediate board attention. She had not specified what those matters were, which meant Wallace would be walking into the meeting blind. Expecting perhaps to hear Victoria's resignation or to continue his campaign against her, he would not be prepared for what was actually coming. Marcus arrived at the building early, not in his janitor uniform, but in a suit he had borrowed from David. It was slightly too big in the shoulders, but it made him look professional, authoritative. He needed that today. Victoria had asked him to be present at the meeting, not as a janitor, but as a witness, and as the person whose investigative work had uncovered the truth. The board needed to see him as Dr. Marcus Chun, needed to understand that his presence in Victoria's life had been beneficial, not compromising. He stood outside the boardroom, his heart hammering against his ribs, trying to channel the confidence he used to feel when presenting at conferences or speaking to concerned parents about their children's treatment plan. Victoria emerged from her office looking like a warrior preparing for battle. She wore a sharp black suit that made her look both powerful and untouchable, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression calm and focused. When she saw Marcus, something softened in her eyes. You look good, she said, like yourself. He understood what she meant. For the first time in 5 years, he felt like himself. It's not a man in hiding, not someone trying to disappear into the background, but Dr. Marcus Chun, someone with value value and expertise, and the right to stand in rooms where decisions were made. The boardroom was already full when they entered. 11 board members sat around the long mahogany table, their expressions ranging from curious to annoyed at being summoned on such short notice. Wallace Brightman sat at the far end, his posture relaxed, a slight smirk on his face. He thought he had already won. Victoria took her position at the head of the table, and Marcus stood beside her, his presence a statement in itself. Wallace's smirk faltered when he saw Marcus's confusion flickering across his features. "What is this?" Wallace asked, his voice sharp. "What's the janitor doing at a board meeting?" "Dr. Chun," Victoria corrected him, her voice cool and precise, "is here because his investigative work has uncovered information critical to this company's future. But before we get to that, I want to address the accusation you made yesterday, Wallace. You suggested that my relationship with Dr. Chun represented poor judgment and a security risk. Let me provide some context for the board." She proceeded to explain, clearly and without defensiveness, how Marcus had helped Sophie, how his background as a child psychologist made him uniquely qualified to work with her daughter, how the security access had been granted for legitimate reasons related to their collaborative work on company strategy during the takeover crisis. She laid out the facts methodically, stripping away the sinister narrative Wallace had tried to construct. Several board members nodded, their expressions shifting from suspicion to understanding. Marcus could see the dynamic changing in real time, the way Victoria's honesty and transparency were disarming the skepticism Wallace had planted. But then Victoria shifted gears, her voice hardening. "However, since Wallace has raised concerns about security and judgment, I think it's appropriate that we examine everyone's conduct. Dr. Chun, would you please share what you've discovered?" Marcus stepped forward, his mouth dry but his voice steady. "Over the past 48 hours, with the help of a forensic accountant, I've been investigating financial irregularities that came to my attention through conversations I overheard while performing my custodial duties." He saw Wallace's face go pale, saw the moment the man realized this meeting wasn't going the way he had planned. "What I found," Marcus continued, "was a pattern of financial misconduct stretching back over 2 years. Wallace Brightman has been using his position on this board to funnel company opportunities to his private investment fund, accepting kickbacks from vendors, and falsifying expense reports to hide his activities." The boardroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Wallace stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is absurd. You're going to take the word of a janitor over mine? I'm a founding board member of this company." Marcus didn't flinch. "I'm not asking you to take my word. I'm asking you to look at the evidence." He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table to the board chairman. "That contains copies of expense reports, wire transfer records, and email communications documenting Wallace's activities. All of this information was provided by Jennifer Morrison, his executive assistant, who filed a formal complaint with your compliance department last week." The chairman opened the folder, his expression growing darker as he scanned the document. The other board members leaned in, passing pages between them, their shock giving way to anger. Wallace remained standing, his confident facade crumbling. "This is a setup," he pointed at Marcus. "That man has manipulated all of you. He's gotten into Victoria's head, compromised her judgment, and now he's manufacturing evidence to discredit me." But his words rang hollow, desperate. The evidence was too detailed, too damning. The board chairman looked up from the documents, his face grave. "Wallace, I think you need to excuse yourself from this meeting. We'll be voting on whether to refer this matter to law enforcement." Wallace's hands were shaking as he gathered his briefcase. He looked at Victoria with pure hatred. "You think you've won? This isn't over. You've made an enemy today, Victoria. An enemy you'll regret." He stormed out of the boardroom, slamming the door behind him. In the silence that followed, the chairman turned to Victoria. "I owe you an apology. We all do. Wallace's accusations about your judgment, they were clearly projection. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership this company needs." The vote was unanimous. The board would refer Wallace's conduct to the authorities and would begin the process of removing him from his position. Victoria thanked them, her composure never wavering, but Marcus could see the relief in the set of her shoulder, the way she finally allowed herself to breathe. As the board members filed out, several of them stopped to shake Marcus's hand to thank him for his diligence. One older board member, a woman named Margaret, who had been friends with Victoria's father, pulled him aside. "Dr. Chun," she said warmly, "this company owes you a debt. Have you considered returning to your field? I sit on the board of the Children's Hospital Foundation. We're always looking for talented people." The offer was tempting, a door opening to his old life. But Marcus looked at Victoria, at the woman who had seen him when he was invisible, who had trusted him when he couldn't trust himself, and he knew his path forward wasn't about returning to what he had been. It was about becoming something new. "Thank you," he said to Margaret. "I'll definitely think about it, but right now I have other priorities." 3 months later, Marcus stood in the lobby of Novatech headquarters, but this time he wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform. He wore a suit, carried a briefcase, and had a new title, Director of Community Wellness Program. Victoria had created the position specifically for him, a role that combined his expertise in child psychology with corporate outreach. He would be developing programs to support employees' children, creating educational partnerships, building bridges between the company and the community it served. It was meaningful work that let him use his gifts without the weight of private practice overhead. Emma and Sophie were now inseparable, spending weekends together, studying together, growing up as sisters in everything but blood. Sophie read at grade level now, her confidence soaring with each achievement. Emma had taught her that different wasn't wrong, and Sophie had taught Emma that vulnerability was strength. They were good for each other, the way their parents were good for each other. Victoria and Marcus had taken their relationship slowly, navigating the complications of blending their lives with care and intention. They had dinner together twice a week, took the girls to museums and parks, built a foundation of trust and understanding. There had been one perfect first kiss on a rainy Tuesday evening, standing in Victoria's kitchen while the girls did homework at the table, and the promise of more to come. On a Sunday afternoon in early spring, the four of them walked through Northwood Park, the same park where Victoria had once sought Marcus out in desperation. Now they walked together as a family, Marcus holding Victoria's hand while the girls ran ahead, chasing each other around the carousel. Victoria, Marcus said quietly, "I wanted to thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for reminding me that I was still Dr. Marcus Chun, even when I had forgotten." She squeezed his hand. "You did the same for me. You reminded me that being a CEO wasn't the only thing that mattered. That, being a mother, being a person, those things were just as." They stood together watching their daughters play, and Marcus thought about the question that had started everything. How do you know our company's security code? The answer had seemed simple at the time: because you trusted me. But now he understood it was deeper than that. He knew the code because Victoria had seen past the uniform to the person underneath, because she had taken a risk on someone society had deemed invisible, because sometimes the most important security, the kind that truly protected what mattered, wasn't about codes or access levels. It was about trust, vulnerability, and the courage to let someone in.